It is my pleasure to welcome our very own, your second, Rachel. Thank you.
Morning.
Good morning.
I felt a little bit of a tickle, so water bottles with me this morning. Probably leave it up here, so we're not. And it's so kind of you to welcome me in that way and call me your very own. I was blessed to be with the UU congregation of Bowling Green, Kentucky last Sunday, and I've been with them like once a year, and they're wonderful. They put slides up behind me when I'm talking, and it said the Reverend Dr. Rachel Rogers, and I was like, not quite, but thank you very much. Yeah, the nearly Reverend is what someone else called me recently. So anyway, I bring that up because to be known and to be in community and to have the relationship we have is a blessing to me. So I'm really happy to be here this Sunday after Thanksgiving. I'm talking about gratitude today, but a little bit in a roundabout way. And I think also you may pick up a through line to the messages I've been bringing over these past few months because you were all on a journey with me a little bit. And what I've been recognizing is something that first came up for me in one of these quiet, dark mornings that I experience at my house. There's a moment, most of those mornings, when the house is still quiet, the light hasn't fully come in yet. The only sound in the room is the hum of the heat because the intake is right next to where I'm sitting, and the scratch of my favorite pen on my journal. Typically, I'm on a big, comfy sofa, and my dog is curled up in the tightest little ball imaginable. Like, you don't know how she gets that little next to me. The day hasn't quite begun to make its demands. Sometimes I sit in that moment longer than I mean to before I become productive, because I'm up early because I have all this stuff I have to do before my kids wake up. And I'll sit there longer than I mean to before getting started, not because I'm meditating or because I'm feeling really disciplined about the quiet, but because it just takes a while for my mind to settle. For the first few minutes before I get dug into the work, I'm already scrolling the day ahead, the meeting, the lunches to pack, the things undone. But if I just wait long enough, if I breathe long enough, typically something will shift. Those lists fade, and what's left isn't accomplishment or control, but just presence. And sometimes in those moments, I catch a glimpse of what I can only call enough. It doesn't arrive because everything's in order. It arrives in spite of the mess. The toys inexplicably strewn all over the coffee table, the clutter of an ordinary morning, the sense that the world is rushing by without me. Excuse me. Somehow, even there, something in me whispers, this moment belongs to you. This is sufficient. And that has me wondering, why does it feel so rare? This sense that nothing more is needed. And why do we lose it so quickly? As soon as the world wakes up, it begins whispering or shouting that we need more success, more followers, more square footage, more self-improvement, even more spirituality sometimes. And we can feel it, the tug of it, the way it sinks its hooks into our days. Even our small talk will rehearse this scarcity. How are you? Busy, tired, behind. We bond over exhaustion, over what's missing. We call it being realistic, but maybe it's something else. A kind of cultural prayer we keep repeating without meaning. A prayer of not enough. Our world depends on that prayer. It depends on us feeling slightly behind, slightly lacking. We live surrounded by the promise that satisfaction can be bought if we just work harder, or spend more, or optimize, or achieve. Even in the most personal parts of our lives, it can creep in. We compare our families, our bodies, our homes. We imagine there's a version of us just around the corner, a better, calmer, more fulfilled version, if we could just get there. But the finish line keeps moving. The appetite for more is never fed. The theologian Walter Brueggemann once called this the myth of scarcity. The story that who we are and what we have will never be enough. And I think he was right when he said this wasn't just an economic problem. It's a spiritual problem. Because when we live in that story, we forget the truth of sufficiency. We forget that joy and meaning are available here, not someday when conditions improve. And yet, every once in a while, something cracks through. A pause, a breath, a glimpse of the world as it is, full, ordinary, already humming with life. And maybe that's what I was feeling in the stillness of the morning, when we begin to notice those moments when the day eases, when the heart unclenches, something in us wants to protect them, to honor them. And that impulse is the beginning of gratitude. One of those ones, guys, I'm sorry. And this is how we remember that sufficiency is not just for ourselves. It's a recognition of our connection to the larger web that makes our lives possible. Gratitude then becomes less about performing thankfulness and more about seeing clearly, about noticing what sustains us, the relationships, the help we've received, the small mercies that have carried us farther than we realized. Gratitude is a way of living with our eyes open. And now that Thanksgiving has passed, the tables, the travel, the tender and complicated moments that many of us are still carrying after whatever the holiday has stirred up. And almost before we could catch our breath, Black Friday arrives, insisting that whatever we lack can be solved through the next purchase or by saving the most money on that gift buying expenditure. It's striking how quickly a day centered on gratitude is followed by a weekend built on manufactured scarcity. Which is why gratitude has to go deeper than sentiment. It has to clarify what matters. It has to call something out of us. When we give thanks for what sustains us, for the land, for each other, for breath itself, we are reminded of our belonging. We remember that we are not isolated consumers in a market of scarcity. We are participants in a living web of interdependence. And in that web, enough is not a fixed quantity. Enough is a relationship. And enough grows when it's shared. So the question becomes, what holds that relationship together? What makes enough possible? Not perfection, not deserving, but something simpler and stronger. The commitment to one another's well-being. And to me, as the Unitarian Universalist standing up here before you, there is no better name to give that than love. Love in the form of a steady orientation towards each other's thriving. Love interrupts the myth that we must compete for worth. Love teaches us that sharing is not a loss. Love reminds us that rest and generosity are part of the world's design, not exceptions to it. And when we act from that place, checking on a neighbor, sharing what we have, giving away what we could have kept, choosing connection over comparison, we aren't just being kind. We are practicing a belief in enough in a way that becomes visible. And this is where sufficiency becomes real, not in what we say, but in how we live. In the book of Exodus, we are told the story of the ancient Israelites and manna, the bread that fell from the sky while they wandered in the desert. Each day they were told to gather only what they needed. If they tried to hoard the extra, it spoiled overnight. Now, what if that story is not about divine punishment, which is how I always read it, speaking of reading the Bible too literally, as we talked about earlier. What if that story is about trust? Trust that what we need will be there when the next day comes. Every tradition has its version of this teaching. The Sabbath, a day of rest, is built on the same idea. For one day each week, you stop striving. You do not produce, you do not accumulate, you do not chase the myth of more. You remember that you are enough and that life goes on even when you pause. Sabbath in this sense is not just a day, it's a spiritual posture, a weekly rehearsal of enough. Of course, this practice isn't easy. We are conditioned from birth to strive, to compete, to prove. The hunger for more can feel like oxygen. And everywhere around us, there are very real circumstances of not enoughness, of food insecurity, of injustice and deprivation. The practice of enough is never about romanticizing scarcity, it's about confronting the systems that create and perpetuate it. Systems that convince us there's not enough, when in truth, there is abundance enough for all. We must be clear here, not everyone has what they need. There are families in our communities choosing between groceries and medication. There are parents skipping meals so their children can eat. There are people cutting pills in half to make them last. We have seen food resources treated as bargaining chips, as SNAP benefits are held back. We're watching healthcare become harder to access and treated as a privilege instead of a right. These are not accidents, they are choices. Policy choices that deny people the abundance that is possible. The practice of enough does not mean closing our eyes to that pain. It means opening them wider, seeing how systems of profit and fear have convinced us that someone else's lack is inevitable. It means remembering that the same love that holds us calls us to hold one another. If we believe in the sufficiency of creation, if we believe that life itself offers enough to sustain all of us, then we are called to make that truth real, to reverse the forces that deny it, to serve each other so that enough isn't a privilege, but a promise. Because the myth of scarcity doesn't only wound our spirits, it starves our neighbors. And our gratitude, if it's real, will always draw us toward repair. Practicing enough asks something countercultural. It asks us to stop feeding the systems that depend on our dissatisfaction. Brueggemann also talks about the Pharaoh story, the story that demands endless labor to feed a never satisfied empire. If that is the story of scarcity, then the practice of enough is a kind of exodus, stepping out of that economy of fear and endless consumption and living as though we are already free. But leaving Egypt is never easy. The wilderness is terrifying. When we stop measuring ourselves by accumulation or production, what's left to define our worth? And maybe that's a central question. If we are not what we produce or what we consume, then who are we? Our world is built on this anxiety. Whole industries depend on us feeling behind, inadequate, in need of fixing. The culture of never enough fuels consumerism, social media, and even certain versions of the American dream. We are taught to measure success by growth. Growth in profits, even when the planet burns. Growth in productivity, even when our bodies break. Growth in possessions, even when our neighbors go hungry. But every sacred tradition I know insists otherwise. In Buddhist teaching, craving is the root of suffering. In the Bible, as we've discussed, hoarding leads to the spoiling of manna. In indigenous wisdom, taking more than you need disrupts the cycle of reciprocity and harmony. When we cook enough for a neighbor, when we give away a coat we could have kept, when we rest even though the work isn't finished, these are gestures through which sufficiency becomes visible. These are the moments when we practice a different economy. Because if we truly believed there was enough care, enough beauty, enough resources, enough bread, we would act different. We would live differently. We would give differently. We would refuse to let a world of plenty tell us there isn't enough for everyone. Gratitude isn't naive optimism. It's realism of the deepest kind. It sees the world as it is, imperfect, unjust, beautiful, sacred, and says thank you for what sustains us through it all. When we practice gratitude for enough, we become steadier. We stop measuring our worth by the metrics of the market. We remember that we belong to this earth, to one another, to something larger than our own striving. And from that remembering, generosity begins to flow. So maybe this week we try a simple practice. When you notice the urge for more stuff, more validation, more control, pause. Take a breath. Look around. Ask, what's already here that is enough? And then give thanks for that. Let that small act be your prayer. Let it be your rebellion. Let it be your peace. May we remember that enough is not a possession, but a practice. May we hold one another through the times when there is more than enough and times when there is not. May our gratitude move our hands as well as our hearts to share, to serve, to repair. And may the love that breathes through all things remind us that our lives are woven together, that your enough and my enough are bound up with one another. May it be so.